Hey, so this is the 12th of November, and today I want to talk to you about sensitivity to electricity and how that was reclassified as a mental disorder. It's very weird, isn't it? What a weird topic, but you'll be amazed because you will see that by the end of this post, it is not so weird at all. And perhaps many of you, even some relatives, have been suffering from that. But most importantly is how the information was already known almost 200 years ago, but how psychiatry came in and altered the information. So listen, it's based on this book. Well, it's not based. I've got all my other books, which I'm going to show you because obviously it fits in. But we have this book here called The Invisible Rainbow, and it's the history of electricity and life, written by this gentleman here, Arthur Firstenberg, and it was published in 2017. Now you can get hold of a copy secondhand, and it is actually available in PDF. Not sure how that happened, but it is online as a PDF. And all I can say is by the time you finish this post or watching this post, and I hope you stay till the end because it is a bit of a long one, but it may change your life. You will go and look for this book, or at least look for it online. So the story, there is the story of electricity, but the author researched the effect of electricity on biological life and how much was already known back in the 1700s when electricity and experimentation in electricity was quite the trend. And just to give you a bit of an idea, this is the thickness of the book, but that entire section here at the back of the book is actually a reference section. So you're looking at thousands of references. It is meticulously researched. So everything will be referenced in the back if you want to look for yourself. But I'm going to go straight into it. There was a time at some point, there's a lot of data, so I'm skipping loads, but when the experimentation were being done, experimenters really did record what was happening and all sorts of physical reactions they were getting and so on and so forth. Now, physicians at the time, i.e. doctors, were well aware of this, and much research was going on about it. Now, if you ask a GP currently about that topic, they'll call you a conspiracy theorist, or they'll say that you're nuts. So here we go. I don't want to keep you in any further mystery. I'm going to go straight into a chapter called Chronic Electrical Illness. It discusses illnesses that were starting to appear when the railways were installed, telegraph poles were installed, and such new electrical equipment. So this is around mid-1800s, and I'm going to go straight in it. There was something which came to be called neurasthenia. So neuro as in nerves, and sthenia as in weakness of the nerves. So some sort of disease or a group of symptoms of disease that they just couldn't quite work out what it was. And I'm going to give you the list shortly, which you will perhaps recognize as something that you may be experiencing now. So here you go. Things were happening. There was all sorts of things happening. Doctors were noticing, fatigue, irritability, headaches, chronic dizziness, nausea, insomnia, tinnitus, weakness, all sorts of factors which kept appearing to personnel who worked on the railways and around telegraph systems. So this is how it started to come up. Some of them became grossly overweight. Some bled from the nose or spat blood, which also matches other descriptions in the book about scientists or electricians who were experimenting with electricity and were getting such reactions as well. Anyway, so it goes on about it. And a man called Beard, actually George Beard, an American physician, I've got it in the other book here, did a lot of research on this to try to work out what it was. What is it that's causing the symptoms, which they kind of called neurasthenia, weakness of the nerves, because they had nothing else for it. And here you go. The most salient observation made by Beard and the late 19th century medical community about neurasthenia are these. It spread along the routes of the railroads and telegraph lines. It affected both men and women, rich and poor, intellectuals and farmers. Its sufferers were often weather sensitive. It sometimes resembled the common cold or influenza. It ran in families. It seized most commonly people in the prime of their life, ages 15 to 45, according to Beard. and other doctors had slightly different age range. It lowered one's tolerance for alcohol and drugs. It made people more prone to allergies and diabetes. And it has neurasthenies, which will be people suffering from that, tended to live longer than average. And sometimes a sign whose significance will be discussed in chapter 10, which is later in the book, neurasthenies passed reddish or dark brown urine. So these people really were investigating to find out what was happening with electricity. And I want to point out that in this book, back to our short history of psychiatry, the author confirms this research, but in a very critical manner. And he says in 1868, George Beard, an American, published his imaginative, impressive, lively, and perceptive catalogue of the complaints which we psychiatry now describe as neurotic, functional, or psychosomatic. Yeah, he interpreted them on an organic basis as due to weakness of the nervous system, which he called neurasthenia. So, and it got on there to criticize this. But that doctor and those doctors were on the right track. There was something wrong. Now, I'm going to read the list of what this included. Irritability, heart palpitation, arrhythmias, irregular beat of the heart, chest pain, shortness of breath and asthma attacks, perspiration, tremor and shivering, ravenous hunger, diarrhea, vertigo, vasomotor disturbances, this to do with the diameter of the blood vessels, so such as flushing, cold extremities, etc., numbness and tingling, insomnia, nausea and vomiting, frequent urination, rheumatic pains, weakness, exhaustion. But here's how psychiatry came into it. Whilst those doctors are trying to solve this mysterious illness that's taking place, here is what occurs. And it is shocking. I have to tell you, it is shocking. The renaming as in this neurasthenia is going to be renamed. In December 1894, an up-and-coming Viennese psychiatrist, you're going to guess who that is, wrote a paper whose influence was enormous and whose consequences for those who came after have been profound and unfortunate. Because of him, neurasthenia, which is still the most common illness of our day, is accepted as a normal element of the human condition for which no external cause need be sought. Because of him, environmental illness, that is, illness caused by toxic environment, is widely thought not to exist, which is what's happening now, isn't it? We talk about all these things that are around us, and if you claim that it's poisons as the environment, you get called tin foiled hat and all sorts of other names and conspiracy theorist and all that sort of things. But listen, it says, okay, so because of him, environmental illness, that is, illness caused by a toxic environment, is widely thought not to exist. Its symptoms automatically blamed on disordered thoughts and out of control emotions. So when you feel not well, you feel poison, there's something not right and all that, as you know, it's like, oh, you've got a mental disorder, which is what this is saying. Because of him, we are today putting millions of people on Xanax, Prozac, and Zoloft instead of cleaning up their environment. For over a century ago, at the dawn of an era that blessed the use of electricity full throttle, not just for communication, but for light, power, and traction, Sigmund Freud renamed neurasthenia anxiety neurosis and its crisis anxiety attacks. Today, we call them panic attacks. The symptoms listed by Freud, in addition to anxiety, will be familiar to every doctor, every anxiety patient, and every person with electrical sensitivity. And that's a list that I just read you. Irritability, heart palpitation. What those doctors were researching were reactions to electricity, which was a completely new system that had been installed and that was, being developed. And this electrical sensitivity was renamed by Freud as being a mental disorder. And other modern equivalents, if you research neurasthenia and modern equivalents, you will find chronic fatigue syndrome, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, burnout, and other such disorders. Now listen, Freud ended the search for a physical cause of neurasthenia by reclassifying it as a mental disease, and then by designating almost all cases of it as anxiety neurosis. He signed its death warrant. Although he pretended to leave neurasthenia as a separate neurosis, he didn't leave it many symptoms, and in Western countries it has been all but forgotten. In some circles it persists as chronic fatigue syndrome, a disease without a cause that many doctors believe is also psychological and that most don't take seriously. Neurasthenia survives in the United States only in the common expression nervous breakdown, whose origin few people remember. Now, it gets worse. In the International Classification of Disease, which is now the DSM here that we have, so I've shown this before in other, this is a psych Bible of mental disorders. In the International Classification of Disease, ICD-10, there is a unique code for neurasthenia, F48.0, but in the version used in the United States, F48 has been removed, and it is now in DSM-5. And if you look at DSM-5, and I'm going to show you here, you will see here in brackets, you see the brackets there, they're the F numbers of the ICD, the International Code of Disease, and it is correct. I've gone through and F48 is not there because it's been split now into all sorts of other disease. And so here we go, the official system, okay, so it's not there. And then it goes on basically and talks about how Russia, on the other hand, at the time in the 1920s, then they worked out that it was electrical sensitivity, and it talks about other things. So that's the first step. And now to give you an idea, it even goes on to talk about Queen Victoria. And Queen Victoria died on the evening of 22nd January 1901 of a brain hemorrhage. She died on the Isle of Wight while she was at her residence at Osborne House. But what happened just at the same time, or literally just moments before she died? Very simple. Marconi, the great inventor of the telegraph, Marconi was also located in Isle of Wight, doing a lot of his experiments and setting up a lot of his telegraph systems. And Marconi, so it says here that Queen Victoria of England, in residence at Osborne House, her estate at the north end of the Isle of Wight, suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died on the evening of January 22, 1901, just as Marconi was firing up a new, more powerful transmitter 12 miles away. And there's loads of interesting information on how Marconi was incredibly ill. He was passing out, he would have blood coming out of his nose and all sorts of stuff as he was, working with this stuff. And so this goes on about what happened. It was successful. He says that his experiment was successful. Queen Victoria died. Well, he wasn't to know that he was responsible for that. And then the next line is, and then there were the bees. And in 1906, 90% of the honeybees on the Isle of Wight had disappeared from the entire island for no apparent reason. Now, I want to point out that we're looking at 1906 here. This is 120 years ago. The whole business of bees being killed off by this, it was already known, by the way. It's not a new thing. It appears to be a new thing nowadays, with 5G, this, that, and the other. It was already known, So 90% of the honeybees had disappeared from the entire island for no apparent reason. The hives all had plenty of honey, but the bees could not even fly. And it is recorded that they are often to be seen crawling up grass stems or up the supports of the hive, where they remain until they fall back to the earth from sheer weakness and soon afterwards die. Swarms of healthy bees were imported from the mainland, but it was of no use. Within a week, the fresh bees were dying off by the thousands. And that chapter then goes on about First World War and the Spanish flu in 1917-18 and what happened just as it broke out. So anyway, here you go. I thought this would be very interesting. I recommend you really look at this book. What is very important is on the symptoms that I've given you here about electrical pollution and the fact that this was known. I mean, this was known. Look here. These are plates from the 1750s. Electricity was being worked at and developed and experimented about, to discover more about electricity already mid 1700s. This is 250 years ago. All that data was known. And as a point of interest here, my last point of interest, and I'm at 15 minutes. I mean, there's so much in there. There's just so much information. There is a whole section on the behavior of plants. And again, goes on here about how that information is not to be found in any current textbooks. But I'm going to do a different post on this. Thank you for watching.